Well, DevCentral Community, it is that time again. It's Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm John and Jason. We're not in the same place today, man, but how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Yeah, unfortunately had some symptoms in a child today, so just to keep the Wagnon family safe, here I am.
Man, I tell you what. Well, on behalf of the Wagnon family, thank you. Thank you. Although, I'm sad we can't be here in the same room together. Here we are virtually together, as we all are, right, in the DevCentral community, and as we do every single week. So we're streaming live on YouTube and LinkedIn and Periscope, and you guys, connect with us. Type in those comments. And I see Anise out there, Pasilva's out there. Great to see you guys. Anise, you guys are looking sharp. Hey, right back at you, although I can't even see you. So, but I trust that you're looking sharp too, man. Awesome.
That's right. Got your Sunday best on, I'm sure.
I'm sure so. Of course, for DevCentral Connects, right? Why not? Why not? Good to go. So Jason, chef, man, hey, chef's always looking out for the best, right?
That's
always
right.
looking out for the interest of us all. So, man, yeah, we appreciate Chef. So, Jason, I got a question for you, man. First of all, or to everyone that's watching, we've got two amazing guests that are going to be with us today. And one of the superpowers of one of our guests is that he can speak more than one language. So my question to you, Jason, is, do you speak more than one language?
Wow. No, I don't.
Did you ever take like a high school, or college class or anything?
Well, I lived in Portugal, actually the Azores, which is a little island off, in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Lived there for a year and a half when I was right at that perfect age to learn languages, like pre 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't learn anything. And then I lived in Italy for 3 years. And, I think I got C's in my Italian class. So it was not a big priority of young Jason to learn a language. But sadly, because I have tried Spanish here and there. Actually, one of my best friends in high school, his mom was from Spain, and their whole house spoke Spanish pretty frequently. So I got to a point where I could, very, very basically converse with them. But yeah, it's use it or lose it, and so it's been years. Yeah.
Well,
so no, stuff, unfortunately. Although Sheffy's got a point, what languages. So I have dabbled in C#. I actually did program in C in college, but then mine is mine of choice is Python, but I have dabbled in Java and C# and C and Perl. Although it's kind of like he who should not be named. So
the programming language, scripting language that should not be named. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then I see Leslie up there. She says, does Pig Latin count, or should I say Igpe Atenlay? Not to brag that I know some Pig Latin, but hey, I'll count it. I'll count whatever, right? Good stuff. No, man. Yeah, I took some Spanish, some Espanol in high school, and it's been since then that I have had any kind of formal, language training. So we lived in Germany for a couple of years, and my kids were at that same kind of age where they were soaking it all up, and I was like, wait a minute, Deutschland and Schnitzel, and I learned some of the basics, but that was about it. So
yeah. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school and then 2 semesters of it in college. And maybe it's me, maybe it's the way they teach it, but it's just none of it really connected. I have done the Duolingo app where it's like an immersive thing where you're not really learning verbs and all that. It just throw you in the deep end and say, hey, let's do a sentence, kind of like kids do when they're growing up. You don't sit there and explain English to your kids; you just speak it. And
you can't really, it's hard to explain the English language. As soon as you create a rule, then it's like, oh, well, never mind. There's 50,000 exceptions. So, how do you do it? Good stuff, man. Well, awesome. Well, it's good to know that our guests today are more advanced than we are in many ways, and languages are one of them. So that's awesome. Well, hey, so we have a real treat for everyone today. And this is today's show is going to be about automation. And our two guests work in the House of Commons, which is the government, one of the houses of government in Canada. And I think it's fascinating. I mean, here we are in America. We're in the midst of an election right now, and I'm sure many people are following that. But certainly in Canada, there's elections. There's two houses. I think they call it the bicameral system of government, where you have a two-house system. And so the House of Commons is the lower house, and I believe they have a Senate as well. But anyway, these guys roll into town. These guys that are our guests today, and they're like, hey, the Canadian House of Commons needs some upgrading when it comes to the way they do business with networks, right? And wow, they have introduced automation and all kinds of modern processes, and people are just absolutely loving life right now. So to hear their journey and to hear how they took a very outdated network and have brought it into modern, standards is completely fascinating. And F5 is a part of that story. So So Jason, go ahead, man.
And these are my people, right? Because they, whereas they might have a development skill, they're hardcore network guys. And that's my background. And so, when we go out on the road and we talk to user groups, you've got the network guys, and we ask the questions, say, hey, is anybody looking at any kind of automation stuff? And you kind of see them, look around the room, like, don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact.
Look down, look away. Yeah.
And it's either they're ashamed that they haven't yet, or they're just terrified of jumping in, and they don't, it's like, when you go to the pool and it's like you're dipping the toe in the water, and so, to have a couple guys on who are hardcore network guys who, not even, I guess about 3 years ago, and we'll hear their story, but, to go, hey, I think we can do some of this stuff, and then boom, hit the ground running, really, really embrace the jump. I'm excited for them to share their story with our audience. So should we get on with it?
I think we need to bring them on, man. Let's get these guys on.
All right.
Well, John Capobianco and Dan Pacheco, welcome to DevCentral Connects. It's great to have you guys here.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Hey, thanks for having us. This is awesome.
That was quite the intro, guys. Thanks a lot for that. That was very, very, very nice.
No problem at all. And just so everyone, if my screen is treating me correctly, directly above me, we have John Capobianco. So you could call this the John column, right?
Yeah.
John, and then over here is Jason, and then Dan is above. So
We
it's
could
kind of
call
that
this
Brady
the
Bunch.
we could call this the Azorian column, because this is something Jason and I have something in common, actually.
Azor, as in like the Azores?
As in we both spent some time in the Azores, or my family's from there, and Jason spent some time growing up there.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
It gets very windy there in the Azores.
It does, yes.
Fantastic.
Being in the middle of the Atlantic, that'll happen.
Yeah, there's not a lot of stuff to block the wind. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey,
the two things I remember from the Azores really well is there was an earthquake there, a pretty severe earthquake there, and we were at one of my dad's military parties, and we were playing out in the field, and you could actually see the ground rolling, and we could barely stand up. And then the other one was the cliffs all around. Like, there's no gradual beach. It's you go to the edge, and then if you take another step, you die. So.
Yeah, well, that's what it's like living on a volcanic island, right? It's live by the sword, die by the sword. Just out of curiosity, I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but John, what island was it?
What island was it?
Jason, what island was it?
Okay.
It was Lodges Field, the American military. So whichever island Lodges Field is on.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
I think it's Dracera, most likely.
Okay.
But all good.
It definitely had a volcanic viewpoint where you could go up into the volcano, and there was a volcanic scientific station about 2/3 the way up. So we'd go there on field trips, and you'd be able to look down over the edge, and you saw the molten lava down, buried. And at every different times you'd go, you'd see nothing, or you'd see it, glowing down there in the distance. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hey, before we get started, Dan, one of your, one of your guilty pleasures in life is that you enjoy some bad jokes every now and then, right?
Love them. Can't get enough.
As soon as I heard that, it just engaged the bad joke, formula in my brain, in my body. And so I had a quick one that I wanted to run by you. I don't know if you've heard this one before, but anyway, I was talking with a friend of mine, which, by the way, there you go, Sebastian Maniac. Great guy. Good to see you, Sebastian. All right. So I'm talking to a friend of mine. He works over at this research lab, right? Works at a research lab. And his latest experiment is to grow human vocal cords in a petri dish, right? So I checked in with him. I said, "Hey, man, how's it going?" And he said that the results speak for themselves.
That's what I'm into. That's what.
Love it.
So one of the reasons why John and I, John Capo and I get along so well together is because he's the king of terrible jokes. Every morning, we'd have a daily stand-up, and we'd be in a room together. And before things got rolling, he'd turn to me and he'd just say this ridiculous, equally ridiculous to your joke,
Nice.
occasionally better, and I would just crack up because it was just too good. And then some days, I would be expecting a joke, and he'd had a rough evening or whatever, and I'd say, "Hey, John, how's it going?" And he'd say, "Oh, terrible, I didn't sleep all night." And I turned to him and I'd be, and yeah, like that was a setup for the joke. And he's like, "No, seriously, I couldn't sleep. It was terrible."
Right.
And I'd be like, let down.
Dang it. Yeah, come up with something. Give me something.
You had mentioned scientific studies. Apparently, ants are immune to COVID-19.
Okay.
Because of their tiny antibodies.
Of course they have.
Oh my goodness.
Told you guys.
We're gonna have to put Daniel back up there. We're just gonna have to flag a dad joke every time. Yeah.
Yeah. This is fantastic. Good to go, man. Hey, we could spend the whole time on dad jokes.
Yeah.
On bad jokes.
That's right. Scrap the automation talk.
Automate the joke time. Good stuff. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, hey, guys, I think it's going to be great for the audience to hear from you, kind of hear the story. I know we did a little intro, but maybe let us know where you came from and then, where you are today in terms of automation and what you do and all that.
Sure. So I started IT 20 years ago in a 3-year computer programmer analyst program, a local community college program in Kingston, Ontario. And I spent most of my career actually not programming, but doing client-server networking with a focus on enterprise networks. I joined the House of Commons in 2013 as part of, you had mentioned the digitization of Parliament. In 2013, there was a next generation program to totally refresh the campus, the wide area network, our perimeters, our firewalls, our L4 to L7 services, a whole new data center, as well as offering new services such as wireless, 802.1x security, voice over IP, a complete overhaul of our network. And to give you a sense of our footprint, we have about 50 buildings in the downtown Ottawa core, heritage buildings and different government buildings that make up the campus, or the precinct as we call it. And then about 450 wide area network sites for each member of parliament has a riding office across the country where their local constituents are. We have to offer connectivity to those sites as well.
Awesome. I've always thought it's interesting with the government buildings and upgrading technology. It's like, man, these buildings were not built yesterday. I mean, these are old, right? So has that been a challenge a little bit? I was thinking about that.
Yeah, so especially I think the biggest challenge with that is from a wiring and wireless perspective, right? So layer one type stuff. These are heritage buildings. These are buildings where the leaders of the country are in making decisions, and we don't have free reign to put an AP right over the Speaker of the House of Commons head, even though that's where our RF maps tell us that would be the optimal place. No, it can't, because this is broadcast nationally, internationally. And so there's a lot of importance placed on perception and aesthetics. So and like some of these buildings are a couple hundred years old, so you can't, walls are several feet thick in some cases. So to run a conduit or do that sort of thing, those are some of the the day-to-day challenges whenever we're making changes.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a building when I was first out of college. I did an internship out at the local Air Force and base here, and one of my rotations was cable plant, and trying to go through concrete walls with cables. Some of the things it's like you're tapping out the 100-meter length of your cables because you only really need to go 5 feet up, but you got to go all the way down to the other end of the building, up and back, because of the physical limitations. It's crazy.
And all the retro stuff. Good stuff, man. Well, so yeah, John, I appreciate that kind of intro. So Dan, how about you? What's your kind of story?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just talk a little bit about myself, since John covered the work environment pretty well. So equal to John, I've been working in IT for about 20 years. I studied computer science at the college level. Didn't actually finish my program. Don't tell my mom. And
Hi, Mom.
while I was
Hi, Mom.
doing, hey mom, while I was doing that, I worked part-time doing desktop support. And then after university, I moved full-time into IT. Started off doing telecom systems, working on PBX systems in call centers, if anyone remembers what a PBX was. And this was right around the time that voice over IP was picking up a lot of steam. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I said, if I want to continue to have a career, I should learn networking, right? So went to night school at a local college called Algonquin College for a year, took a network administration course, and shortly thereafter found a position in networking. And I had a pretty successful career from there on. So, I started off as a route switch guy. That was really my basis. And we had these application delivery controllers that no one really knew how they worked or anything else. They weren't F5 actually, but I got knowing them. And then a couple years after mastering that particular brand, I stumbled upon F5, and I said, oh, I could do all the same stuff I was able to do before. I could just do it so much more efficiently and so much better and so much more full featured. And I really, I got a big, I became a big fan of F5 shortly after getting in touch with that. And and so about 2.5 years ago, I changed positions, different organization altogether, and I had the pleasure of meeting John, who's next to me in the screen, and at the House of Commons, and haven't looked back since. It's been great times, and we've done some amazing things together, and looking forward to continuing down the journey.
I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's actually almost my path exactly. Is router switcher guy, and into the application delivery controller. It's like, what the heck is this thing? And then it's like, oh, that's kind of awesome, and really latched onto that. So hardcore network background. What was the driver for you to start looking at automation?
I can take a stab at this one. So it really is the 3 points, and one is the scale, right? That size of network. We have thousands of interfaces and hundreds of switches and dozens and hundreds of routers. So the scale, the complexity. So we have multi-tenancy here at the House of Commons, where we also support the Senate, the Library of Parliament, the security systems, multimedia systems. So we're sort of an ISP for multiple consumers of the network. So we have VRFs and firewalls and zoning and complexity with NetFlow and 802.1x and QoS models, all that standard network engineering stuff. But the level of complexity at our scale was hurting our agility. And it was the agility that drove me towards automation, where we had a particular change we wanted to make on the network at scale, and it was pretty complex, and it was in production, but it touched about 150 routers, let's say, and we had a pretty serial change. It was more or less the same change on every device, and I stumbled in April of 2017 on docs.ansible.com, and I thought this might be a good first attempt at an automated solution. Now, that's not to say it went very well or that we did a great thing on our first attempt at it. And it wasn't because of the complexity of Ansible necessarily. It was more in our tools and our approach. We were still looking at this like network engineers. I'm going to fire up Notepad and write a YAML playbook and try to run it on an Ansible machine.
Oh, we lose John.
Oh, John froze.
Am I here? Am I here? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I'm at the office. Sorry about that. So
right.
the playbook, ultimately, we had success. Our playbook ran, and it made the 150 changes serially, sequentially, and we validated and tested, and all that went very well. But looking back, there was a lot of nagging questions. Why didn't we just do this manually? Like, it took you 6 weeks to develop the solution. Why didn't you just log into each router and make the change, right? And at the time, it was hard to argue that it was a good approach. So fortunately, a senior software director approached me because they heard about the success of our operational change through automation. It had a big impact organizationally. A lot of different groups heard about it. John automated this crazy thing. You got to hear about this Ansible tool, right? So what the director told me was to work with other developers outside of the IT department and try to get a Git repository and start using different tools and approach it more like a software development problem as opposed to a networking problem. Dan, would you want to jump in?
Yeah, so different story. So similar in vein. So the question that I heard was, how do you get started in automation? And really, my answer is curiosity. So this was actually before I ever had the pleasure of meeting John. I was working somewhere else. And it was just a matter of, similar to the voice over IP story, right? You're talking to different vendors every day, and the sales guys are talking automation, and you're getting these webinars, and it's like, well, what is this stuff, right? Like why, right? And then you start to, drink the Kool-Aid. And so yeah, I started out just spun up an Ansible server in the lab, right? And that in itself was a challenge, right? Like, I'm not a Linux guy. What distro do I use? How do I set it up, right? Just getting that going, and then just tinkering, right? And just throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks, seeing how it works. Is it? And the nagging thought always in the back of my mind is, as the exact same thing John said, right? It took you 6 weeks to do it. Wouldn't it have been quicker to do it manually? Yeah, this one time it took 6 weeks to do because we had to set it all up, right? Next time you want to make that change X, well, you've already done the whole setup, right? Now it's so much easier. Now, we're going to eventually catch up in time. And I saw that, and I saw the potential benefits of it. And I said, I got to have it. And so off and on, Skunkworks, during downtime, tried to explore it as best I could. And quite honestly, I made minimal progress on it. And then you meet a guy like John who's very driven, and has a lot of the missing components, right? So John and I come together pretty well in that where he has strengths, I have weaknesses, and where I have strengths, he potentially has weaknesses. I don't want to say he has weaknesses, but anyway, so we complement each other very well, and working together in that fashion, we're able to really advance things from where I was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So what I've heard so far is that you need to address scale problems with the size of your infrastructure. That there's likely to be some failure up front. So don't be afraid to fail. But then also insatiable curiosity. Those are kind of some of the components to get started. And Dan, you mentioned something, or actually it started with you, John, and you reiterated that, Dan, is the CapEx OpEx argument, right? It's like, yeah, we might have to do the capital expenditure up front, but we save the operational expense down the road, versus, we don't want that big upfront hit of capital, but then, over the long haul, you're going to spend way more money in OpEx. So,
yeah, and just to build on that, the development cycle went from, yes, my first attempt at it as a rookie, no idea what I was doing or what I was getting into. Yeah, it took about 8 weeks of a lot of work, lunch hours, weekends, late nights. But my second attempt, my second and third and fourth and fifth playbooks become 4 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then a couple of days, and then a couple of hours. So that upfront CapEx, it's not like every solution you automate is going to take you 6 weeks to develop. As you learn these tools and you start to develop the muscle memory, then it becomes quite easy, right? So I had the advantage. I had about 3 years on Dan automating the Cisco infrastructure, firewalls, data center switches, routers, that sort of network core infrastructure. And then Dan and I sort of out of that curiosity started, and Dan mentioned it, working in like a DevOps approach. I'm not the F5 expert at the House of Commons. I barely logged into them prior to this engagement with Dan. I'm more pure fabric, network, campus, data center type stuff. But I had a couple of years doing the automation experience with Ansible and automating solutions. So Dan, basically what I said to Dan was, if you can bring me something that you can make work through Postman, if you can make a Postman post, get the request working right, your authentication working right, and the body of your post, if you can get all that going, let's come to me with that solution and we can transform it into an Ansible automated solution, which then builds up to Docker and pipelines, and we'll see all of that today. But that's where we started, was bridging the gap between my skills in automation and networks and Dan's skills with F5 and networks, and his, he did have some automation experience with Ansible as well. And we just, development to me is a fancy way of saying iterative trial and error, right? We go back and forth a bunch of times until it works, and we call it development, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
So
3% development, 97% I'm good at Google. Right?
So I could add on to a bit of what John was saying and actually touch on something you said, Jason, about failure and failing. So what John just described, that was our last attempt, which was our real successful attempt. We actually took a couple of runs at it prior to that JSON attempt, right? So initially, John said, yeah, I've done this with Cisco. We could do it with F5. F5 has CLI, right? We could do it. And I said, yeah, it has CLI and I'm great at it. And so we tried to do it the Cisco way on the F5. That didn't go well. We spent about 2 hours. We both got a bit frustrated with each other. And we said, you know what? Maybe we need a back off period. And, met again, a couple of bad jokes. And, we said, we have these Ansible modules, right? Let's give these a try. Let's see how it works. Ansible using the F5 modules, using an iterative approach. And we did it. We started to make some progress, and okay, yeah, we're making. And then I said, this AS3 thing is picking up a lot of steam, right? We might want to switch our gears. So yeah, let's try it, right? So we went ahead, changed gears, kind of we shelved the Ansible the F5 modules with Ansible, put that to the side, and we started to use AS3, and everything was coming up service main. And for people who played with the older version of AS3 or the non-generic template, might have seen this and might know what I'm talking about. And so service main didn't really appeal to us as an organization as something we wanted to take on. Shelved it again, and went back to developing with the Ansible modules, right? And then it was actually in this medium, DevCentral Connects, when I'm not sure he was the guest at the time, but Sebastian Maniac, I put in my comments, yeah, service main, how frustrating. And Sebastian Maniac, someone I've actually met before at an agility or two, he commented, he's like, Dan, use the generic template, man. You're going to be good. And I'm like, really? So, back with John, right? Or even before John, right? Postman, using AS3, the generic template is like, well, this is exactly what I want. Hey, John, we've got it. Let's go. And that's really when, things took off from that point on. But that long convoluted story, really all to say is, we tried a couple different things, didn't work out, wasn't optimal, retool, go back, and until you find some winning solution, which we're now on track.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And, with the Ansible, you do have the two approaches, right? You've got the modules where you can do that imperative interrogation of the API. And then you've got the AS3, which is that declarative push of, hey, we want F5 to validate state on the F5. And if things aren't really good there, then kick that back and tell us no. But it kind of handles all of that schema validation and all that for you, which is pretty awesome. So as long as your data is good. And John, you were telling me something when we were prepping for the show about the specifically about the shift. Man, I just lost my thought. But the shift from the imperative to the declarative, and what that meant for you guys. But I don't remember specifically what that was.
No, I think I can pick up. I know what you mean. So to Dan's point, when we started on our legacy Cisco platforms, they don't have a RESTful API. The new generation, the Catalyst 9000 series, they've introduced REST Conf as an API on that platform. But all of my legacy platforms, 6500s and 4500s, etc., you're basically SSHing in, and running a bunch of commands serially, you're not able to post a fully declarative intent. And that to me is what really sets F5 ahead in this sphere, is that I can do true infrastructure as code with an intent-based approach, where my intent is expressed in data models, and then I use templates to generate valid JSON that get pushed through the post mechanism through AS3. So if I declare a partition with 2 apps and I push it, when I log back into the F5, I have that partition and those 2 apps and nodes and members and IPs all defined, ready to go. If I make a mistake and I need to adjust an IP, or I want 2 partitions, or whatever the change is, I update my data model, the template generates the code, I post it, and now my F5 reflects my intent. So I think there is a and there's a conversation to be had between declarative and imperative, but because we want our intent, our source of truth, to truly be idempotent and immutable and match what's running on each device, the declarative approach has really worked well for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we kind of set the table. Do you guys want to talk about tools for a little bit, and then we'll get into the demo?
Yeah, sure. Or if you'd like, if you want us to put the screen up, I can talk to the tooling as we go through the demo. So what Dan and I thought, what you're looking at here is an Azure DevOps portal. And I'm sorry if it appears too small. I'll call out anything that's important. And in my other tab here, this is GitHub. So what Azure DevOps is for us is a private Git repository. And if anyone listening isn't familiar with Git versus GitHub, they are different things. Git is the version source control system. It comes included with Linux distros. And actually, Linus Torvald invented Git to source control the Linux project as he was writing it. Now, GitHub is public. You can make private repos, but we don't want to store our code on our infrastructure as code out on the public Git. So we use an Azure DevOps, which is an on-prem solution that has the ability to store Git repositories. So what you're looking at here is a F5 AS3 automation Git repository, and I have a master branch or a main branch. Now, Git has a branching mechanism where you have your main branch, which represents, in our case, all of these artifacts are tested and validated, and they are our intent that runs on the F5. If I want to make a change, so we protect master from direct changes, you have to make what's called a branch. So a branch lets us do our development in the branch, and then ultimately we merge that branch back into master. Now, in our case, and what you'll see here is that pull request mechanism is a trigger in Azure DevOps to trigger a build and then a release of software, and we'll show that live. So what I'm going to do is make a quick branch. Let me go to my branches here. I'm going to make a new branch, and we're just going to call this DCC for DC Connects. I create my branch, and you can see I've switched into that branch. Now, on this machine that you're looking at is a Windows 10 machine. I have Git installed locally, and this is VS Code, which is our IDE or our editor, and it is Git aware and Git enabled. So I have to do a quick Git fetch to make my editor aware of the new branch I just made. And I switch into that branch, DCC. Now what you're looking at here is what I consider a standard Git repository for an Ansible playbook. So I have my group variables, my intended config, my playbook itself, and then some roles, including my data models and my templates. We'll come back to these artifacts. I'll peel the onion once we show the demo. But for our case, we go into a file called main.yaml in the roles defaults folder. And this is our intended config, our data model for the F5. Now, what you'll see is it's very simple for one, and I would recommend your data models should be simple. It's made up of lists and key value pairs, and that's it. So what you can see is I have a role underscore tenants where I define a tenant called finance that has a route domain of 110 and has the following applications. Finance Apple 1 that has all of these various things. Okay, so let's go ahead and add finance app 02. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And one thing you're going to see is the power of VS Code. I have a YAML extension because this is a YAML file. And right away it highlights that I have a duplicate key. So I'm using the tools to help lint or validate my code. If I were to post this, I would get an error because it's not a valid JSON file because there's a duplicate. So I'm going to make that app 02, oops, 02. And I'm just going to make the IPs unique here. Let's say 7778. And let's make this 100 and 101. Okay, so I save this file. Then the Git actions take over. So I have to commit this change into my local branch. Added an app to finance, I should say. And now you're going to see I push that back into my repository. And then my Azure DevOps is sensitive to that Git action. So it's saying, do you want to create a pull request because this branch has been updated? So I create my pull request, and here's where we get a little bit interactive. I can add a title, added an app to finance, my description. Now here's where I'm going to add Dan as a reviewer. If I can get the menu to pick up his name.
Try patched.
Yeah, let me try that instead. There we go. So I add Dan to review it. Now here I could associate this with a work item. Azure DevOps has Kanban boards and agile mobility boards and different work tracking. I don't have that set up right now, but I could tie this to an upstream work item. And then down here, you can see there is the change. These lines of code have been added to this main.yaml file. So I create, actually, I'm going to back out of this pull request because I missed a step in my hang on 1 second. I'm just going to abandon this. One thing I want to include in my pull request for Dan to review is the automatic artifacts that we generate. Sorry, I missed that step. My bad. So because we're
While
using
you're doing that, I have a question. I have a question real quick from Anise on, because of the sensitivity of information that might be in your. He's asking, would you prefer to have a local GitHub or a Git repository because of the information that's in there versus it being public?
Yeah. When I first started, GitHub only offered public repositories. Now they offer private repos where you can add levels of control as to who can do clones or pull requests. One thing I'll mention, and I'll show this when we peel back the onion, one piece of sensitive information is our admin password, the password that we have to pass the F5. The Ansible playbook still has to authenticate and securely connect to the API. So what we use is Ansible Vault, and I can show you the vaulted mechanism. But we vault a variable so that the password I'll show you. The password is just garbage. It's just garbled text. In here, you can see here password, and you can see it's small, but it says vault and then a bunch of characters. At release time, when we run our Docker container image, I haven't spoke about that yet, but that's how we do our release mechanism. We mount in a volume file that's on the machine where the Docker container runs that unlocks this vault file. So this makes it safe for us to store on GitHub. But again, you've got to be very careful with what you store on GitHub. DNS records, private SSH keys, enable secrets that aren't encrypted.
Essentially, you're giving up information about your network. So if anyone's trying to do any recognizance on your organization, if you have everything publicly available, it's a big no-no. So for Anis's question, yeah, essentially, yeah, just the risk of information, even if it doesn't seem sensitive, someone who's clever can use that information to gain more information to get into something sensitive. So that's the benefit of keeping it private.
So I'm just because I don't want to lose anyone here. Originally, I added another application to our data model. And now I'm going to show you the step that it's a bit of a manual step. We can automate it, but for the sake of the demo, it's still a manual step. We have templates that will generate the JSON, the valid JSON that we're going to do the post with. But we also have an opportunity using the same logic to template human readable artifacts. So what I'm running here is Ansible-playbook --tags documentation, and then the name of our playbook. What the tag does, if I show you our tasks, I've tagged only the steps that generate documentation with the tag documentation. And then the actual post here, I don't tag it documentation. So all I want to do in this step is to generate my JSON, a CSV file, and a markdown file. And I'll show you where this is important for when Dan goes to review the pull request. Now he'll have human readable artifacts, and we're also automatically generating our intent and human readable artifacts. So I just have to do the get add star, get commit AM, and I'm going to say refresh artifacts for my message. And then I have to push it back up into my repo. And then I'll go back to that step where I left off with the pull request. So if I go back into TFS here.
And just to reiterate what you were doing there, it's not so much you're changing anything about what's going to be applied. You're just making it easier for the people who are reviewing to review.
Exactly. So now in this pull request, what you'll see is additional artifacts that Dan can use to review. So what we have is our main.yaml file. This is where I added the application to the intent in a the data model for this new Finance 02 app. But then I have, here's the JSON that got generated that will be posted. And then I have it in human readable markdown format, which has all of this great information, as well as a CSV file. Now, the other place I don't have to consume this here in TFS, if I go back to VS Code and refresh, you'll see I have a one arrow down. It means I have new artifacts that I can review in my code editor to see, okay, there's Finance 02 that has been added. So now I'm going to ask Dan to review this, Pacheco Dan, and I'm going to submit my pull request. Where did my pull request go? Submit. It's hiding on me. There's a submit button somewhere here. Create. Why won't it let me create that? Let me untag Dan here.
Yep.
It doesn't have a title. I'm sorry. It doesn't have a title here. Pull request, adding Finance 02 app. Sorry about that.
I was going to say, because it's a live demo, John, and something always goes wrong with a live demo.
So now I'm going to create the pull request. So if you want to flip over to Dan's screen real quick. So this is how we collaborate. When you hear DevOps, what does DevOps really mean? This to me is what it means, where we're working with code and artifacts that are code based. And now Dan has an opportunity to do the QA. So Dan, I didn't ping you, Dan. You'll just have to go into TFS. Okay, so
pull request.
So Dan has an email. He actually gets an email notification that I've asked him to review the pull request. So he's going to click on the review.
Yeah.
And this gives Dan an opportunity to approve it, reject it, add comments, add suggestions, add other reviewers, do different things. Still see your email, Dan. Sorry. Okay, here it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
It's just I find the screen refresh is slow with the screen share.
Okay. So now Dan can add his comment, and Dan can actually approve the pull request. Now that's not completing it. It's just to say that Dan has had a look at it, and Dan has all of those artifacts, the CSV file, the markdown file, and the JSON file, as well as the YAML file, that he can look at the code. And then just click approve in the top right there, Dan. Or you were just going to show the files. I see.
Yeah, just for brevity, we'll just speed through it a little. We won't actually, but here's what I would review prior to hitting the approve.
So now you can switch back to my screen if you don't mind. And I can see that Dan has approved the change. I love your work. So now I'll try to keep up. But when I hit this complete button, this is what kicks off the trigger for our CI/CD. So I hit complete. I'm going to delete this branch after we're merging because we're done with the branch. complete merge. Now this will change to completed. And if I'm quick enough and go to my pipelines, you'll see that this is running. This pipeline is running. So if I go to this pipeline and go to the logs, this has checked out my branch. It has built a Docker container image, and it's in the process of pushing that Docker container image into what they call a Docker container registry. Right now, it's similar to GitHub. We're using Docker IO for our registry, but you can host the registry in Azure DevOps privately. So this is just, okay, so now I have all my logs, and I can see I have a successful build. Now, if I go to my releases, because the successful build will kick off a release, and you can see my releases in progress here based on this artifact, and you can see that it is this 448, so I have a build ID that I can reference, and now we'll have the output logs. Pardon me. Now, one thing I'll just highlight, if I go to the run an image, here is the Ansible playbook. So if I ran this at the CLI, I would see something similar, but I can see here the play recap. It was okay for 4 steps, and it made 3 changes. And because the container image itself is Docker aware or Ansible aware, it was a successful release in that the Docker didn't return an error code. Now, if you want to flip over to Dan's screen, we should have shown this, that we didn't Martha Stewart this, that we didn't cheat. But if you look in the F5 here, he should have a finance partition with 2 applications in it.
So if you guys are on my screen, here
Yep.
they are, right? So this was not previously here. This is just what we created.
Nice.
So now, to show the full power of that declarative nature of this, I'll do this very quickly and I won't talk to it. Adding another partition.
Can we go back to John's screen?
And app. Yeah, so I'm just making a, cannot contain, right. Adding, let's just do HR. I'll call it HR. Since we have a finance, HR's come along and HR would like some apps and a partition themselves. So now I just have to refresh my Git, change into, where's HR?
So while John is setting this up, I see a couple of questions in the comments that I'm happy to answer if you guys want me to tackle that.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So I see Sebastian asked about if we're using any of the others, any of the other APIs like declarative onboarding or the telemetry streaming or fast. And so far, not yet. So the declarative onboarding is one that interests me a lot. And I wish we would have been this far along a year ago, but that's always the story, right? You always wish you knew now what you knew then. So we actually built out a full data center, and we did it the traditional way, the way that we've always built out F5s and data centers. And with that came all the same headaches that always happens, right? You build it out, it's mint, it's exactly the way you want it. And then for whatever reason, the IP scheme needs to change, right? And you gotta change your IPs and change whatever else on the or the routes change, your default gateway, whatever the case is, right? And a couple of times it's happened where you got to go in and then make those changes. If we would have been this far along, our new data center would have been fully built out, the F5 infrastructure fully built out using the declarative onboarding. And so we haven't used it in a production environment, but I have tinkered with it, skunk works on the side.
Okay, so
got another one here about. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'll just kick this off, and then you can take another question. So all I've done, and I could do whatever I want. If the route domain should be 90 instead of 110, or the IPs should be different, or we don't want Finance App 02. I've copied Finance and the 2 apps, and I've renamed them. They have to be unique still. So HR App 01, HR App 02, and some unique IPs. I'm going to save this and commit this in here, right? Adding HR. And then I push this up, and then I'll have a pull request waiting in here. And I'm going to do the pull request, create, complete, and then I will have a build kicking off. And this will just take a second to build. And then we'll have a release kickoff in my F5 release.
John, while that's going, we had a question on what the Docker container what's the Docker container itself being used for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think of in terms of the encapsulation or the nesting, we get this working at the CLI or in Postman. Then we encapsulate that in Ansible and make it an Ansible playbook. And now Docker is what's encapsulated around the Ansible playbook that lets us run it as a build and release through the pipeline here. Prior to this capability, we've been writing playbooks that a human would log in Friday night in the approved change window and run the playbook. This lets us go the step beyond to use software definitions and software builds and releases to push out the code. Now, if you look in my repository here, the only thing that makes it different from any other Git repo for Ansible is this Docker file. Now, I'm not the best at Docker. I'm very new at this stuff, but it's kind of like an old bat file or an old INI file. And in my case, I'm saying build a Docker container using Alpine, install these packages, Python and Git and Ansible, copy in my artifacts, my playbook and my group vars and things like that. And then as an entry point, run the Ansible playbook and point to that playbook file. Now in the build, in the pipeline here, in my build definition, I'm going to call it, this is where I point to when I say build an image. Right here is where I reference that Docker file. So Azure DevOps picks up this Docker file and says, okay, use those bat file instructions to assemble Docker.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool.
So Dan, let me see how that release, I don't know why it failed. Did something fail? Yeah.
I'm assuming you probably, when you pasted in the YAML file, you didn't make all your objects unique name-wise or IP-wise. So you probably got a TMSH error jumping back at you. But I saw a good question. I think it's a question that I had when I first started down this path. It came from Charles, I think, asking, I don't get it. YAML is creating JSON. Pourquoi? And I think you can speak to that, John.
Pourquoi?
So the JSON got generated from the YAML file. Yes, so let me put them up side by side. The YAML file is the data model. So actually, let me go a step further back. What Dan presented me with was a valid JSON file, something that looked like this. Okay, so this is the completed JSON that we post as the body of a request. What we did was we basically took everything, this whole file, and saved it as a file called application.j2 or a Jinja2 file. We then go through it and we take out things like the route domain number here, or the class application, or the virtual IP address. All of those actual data values end up in the data model. And then what you end up with, if I put them side by side, is a Jinja2 template, which is what you're looking at on the right, that contains the logic, the for loops, and the if statements. And then at Ansible runtime, it compiles the template filling in the data model variables at runtime.
So, John, if you don't mind, I can...
Yeah, go ahead,
different
please.
spin on the same thing, right? So essentially, to get down this path, it's like, how do I get John something that we can use to scale out? So I jumped on the F5, CLI, GUI, didn't really matter. I produced my desired config. I took that config and I made it match, but in JSON format, something that I could then push with Postman to the AS3 API to configure the exact same thing. At that point, I've got good working JSON. And then I show this to John, and together we decide what could be variabilized. So what changes from one app to another, what's always there, what's required. And then we built out with conditional if statements and for loops. We basically built out this, which you're seeing, which is the ability to then scale out the main.yaml file with however many partitions, applications, pools you want to produce a valid JSON just like I did at the beginning manually, but it's being produced through this process. And then that valid JSON gets pushed to the F5 AS3 interface. If that helps, Charles.
Yeah. The other point I just want to make is about in the version and source control system. What's very interesting is that you can use an extension called Git Lens. Is mine enabled? Where's my Git Lens? And it will give you all of that rich Git metadata. So it is enabled. So here, for example, if I go over this line, you might not be able to see it. Finance. It says Dan Pacheco added this a month ago under the multi-partition under these pull requests. And I can look at the commit details and the changes. We originally called this AS3, and then Dan renamed it Finance. So we can work like developers. I can come back from my month-long vacation and easily step over the history of pull requests, either in VS Code or in TFS or Azure DevOps. I can do similar things here. If I go to my pull requests completed, okay, adding HR, I can look at that pull request and it has all of the artifacts. Oh, right, Dan added an HR partition with 2 applications through this file on this change in this approved pull request. So we really get to work like developers this way.
Well, and having that history too, you know, I mean, I've worked in environments where we did no change management at all, and that's a nightmare. But then even, you know, traditional change management systems in network is a lot of Excel spreadsheets, or, you know, maybe you have a database and you can do a rudimentary file diff, but you know, and then some of the tools. Man, it's been so long since I've been in the network world. I don't remember the name of the big daddy, but they weren't for the faint of heart.
Right.
And so, you know, being able to work with it with a git diff is amazingly simple. Once you just expose yourself, it's really not that complex, and it's wildly helpful to stay on top of that, you know, all those changes.
I think that's pretty much it for the demo. Yeah. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we can just have the conversation now. If you guys want. I
saw Anna's post a question saying, "Is the TFS approval thing, is that mandatory?" And the answer is no, certainly not. That's the workflow that we built out for our use. Yeah, thank you for putting that on the screen. That's the workflow we built out, but it doesn't need to be. We don't need a third-party approval to click that checkbox or to approve it. It depends on your organization's workflow and how you want to do it.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention is that the CD does not have to be immediate. This is a lab environment and a development space for us. So we have the CI do the Docker container build on a pull request and then immediately release through the CD. That CD might not fit in production. I don't want to be pushing applications or VLAN changes at 2 p.m, right? So you can uncheck the continuous release and say release every night at 6 p.m. or release every Friday night, or release when someone initiates a release, right? In a more of a human change release process. So don't be too intimidated that, you know, oh my, like, I don't need microservices. I don't need this change every minute ongoing during production hours. You have flexibility there.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, I forgot to mention this earlier while you guys were talking, is that, you know, from our perspective, certainly it's about the, you know, the F5 part of the automation story, but, you know, from infrastructure as code, there's a lot more infrastructure than just F5. And it's not, you know, just because F5 does application services doesn't mean that non-application services cannot benefit from automation. So, you know, if you right now are thinking application services is way too high a bar for me to even think about right now, you know, getting your feet wet on the infrastructure and your switch fabric or whatever, being able to push out ACL updates and all those kinds of things, start thinking about those things, and maybe I won't say low hanging fruit, but the lower hanging fruit of simple changes, and then you can build up over time.
Yeah, I'm looking through the questions, and I see Marcus wants to know about using Ansible as a general configuration tool and using Terraform. We're not using Terraform yet. It's kind of on our radar peripherally. We've heard about it and heard good things. But Ansible has been a pretty one-size-fit-all tool for us. Cisco Catalyst or NXOS or F5 or ASA, anything within an open API, we've been able to use Ansible. We also have not started using Tower. Like I said, to this point in our journey of automation, it's been very hybrid human running playbooks, not a fully CI/CD automated type deployment. We're hoping Azure DevOps will lead us a little closer to full CI/CD, but we haven't dabbled with Tower or Terraform yet.
John, I saw a question about whether all of this is covered in your book. So for people who don't know, and I didn't know, so John's an author, and he writes about IT and this topic in particular. And one of your fans, probably your Twitter followers, asked about whether. There you go.
Yeah. So this process, it is covered in my first book. But the last chapter is CI/CD in my first book, but it was very theoretical at the time. What might be possible with Ansible in a CI/CD. My next book is more about APIs and using the Ansible URI module, and there'll be a full chapter on F5 because of how successful I've been with it, as an example in this, my field guide part of the book. So it's going well. I'm making good progress. I've spent a lot of time on my vacation writing, and I appreciate the support and following me along, and that's great. Thank you.
Wow. You work on your vacation, John?
Yeah, I do. I was so taken and enamored and just blown away by Ansible's capabilities. It was a kind of a passion project to put a book out there for people like me, hopefully to learn from my mistakes and maybe find a better path towards success from a lot of failure in the field from me. So the book is kind of like, don't do what John started with, try it this way. Don't do what he does, do what he says.
I don't know. I think failure is an important part of the learning process for everybody. I think if you always have success, you're missing something in your development. Maybe that's wrong, but that's kind of how I feel about that.
I completely agree. I don't think you're learning. If this all just worked and clicked, what have I learned? What do I know differently than I did yesterday? So and on the failure point, as long as you're failing fast, right? You don't want to chase some problem too long or exhaust yourself over something that's not working. Fail fast, put it down. To Dan's point earlier, we tried Ansible, didn't work. We tried AS3, worked a lot better. Let's follow that success and scaffold on our success, right?
Yeah. I had a mentor once, who I went skiing with out in Colorado, and he's like a hard driver. He's like, Jason, how many times have you fallen today? And I was like, I don't think I've fallen yet today. He's like, well, you ain't skiing hard enough. It's like,
that's right.
You're not falling, you're not learning. So
I love it.
All right, well, we got a comment here from Joe Antonio Pacheco. Awesome discussion, learning so much from the Azores. Is that family?
Same last name.
Good to go, man. Dan, you're not related to Joe Antonio, are you?
I don't know.
Who knows?
Good long lost family.
Yeah, go Azores. Go Azores. One thing, John, we talked about quickly is, as you do all this work, and which by the way, one quick thing I just want to applaud both of you on is the vulnerability or the transparency of your whole story. That you weren't born into just being an automation expert. You had to grind a little bit. You had to get there, right? And there's so many of us are like that. I mean, I'm certainly no automation expert, and I think the majority of our DevCentral community are not automation experts, right? And so I think it's so encouraging to know that it's like, hey, here's these guys really making a difference, and they had to start at square one also, and so that's really cool. But also, and really quick on that, and I'll let you comment. It's really cool to see the fruits of your labor from maybe the end user perspective. That it's like, hey, I'm doing all these Ansible playbooks and YAML, JSON, all this stuff. It's so cool. But then at the House of Commons, for the people that are in the trenches every day doing their thing, they have actually seen a noticeable difference. And you talked at one point about like sweeping the room for, when they talk about like super secret classified type, information, you can do some of that automated and it speeds things up.
Yeah, so it's fun and it's exciting and nerdy and interesting, but it has to have value to the business, right? To the organization itself. It can't just be some science project that the IT guys are having some fun with. So we have highly classified meetings that there can't be any wireless radio signals in the room. We knife the fiber to the physical switches, but we have to protect it from the wireless signals. And as you know, wireless is self-healing. So if I turn down a couple of access points, every other access points cranks up their power to try to compensate for that. So we had to sweep and trial and error back and forth and identify, say, 50 wireless access points that need to be turned down before the meeting can start. Now, this means the business could be waiting for IT. We can't start the meeting till IT has turned down all the APs, and that might be an hour or two or however long it takes for someone to go. Imagine doing it manually. Find every switch, find every port, the right port, shut them down, blah, blah, blah. Now we just have them run a playbook, an Ansible playbook on demand or scheduled, and the business is ready to go and start doing what they need to do without waiting for IT. And on the failure point, and learning and starting, what I'd like people, if you're still intimidated and if you think you can't do this, it's too much, it's too hard, the barrier for entry is very low. It's very low. If you can make OSPF neighbors come up or BGP neighbors or a static route send traffic to the internet or bring up layer 7 services on an F5, if you can do those things, believe me, you can write a YAML file and a Jinja template and an Ansible playbook. It's trivial compared to the other things that you've learned in your career so far.
Yeah, that is a great point. That bumped real quick. So the question on, okay, we can configure things and we can push it out. This is a good question on, are you using any automation to test your setups after deploying the changes?
So we are, yes, and we're doing a similar, so in that release step that I showed you, my release definition, in this pipeline demo that we've done today, we're jumping right to pushing the release. But we could run other Docker containers or other playbooks in that pipeline that capture the current state, maybe capture counters or do some API get and get RESTful data back, then move on to the change step, and then recapture the state and the counters and the information post-release as well. So we're building towards that. We're doing that in the Cisco world for sure, using their PyATS automatic testing, if you're familiar with that. And we're moving into doing similar things with the AS3. Dan, do you want to speak to the testing we're going to think of?
Not yet. It's still early stages on the F5 front. What it comes down to is, and I'd love to get the person who asked that question, their input on it. What would you want to see before and after? Like, what is it that you're looking for that you think would be useful? Because I was trying to think of use cases and where would come in most beneficial to put the effort in to make that happen. And that's where my head's at right now, just thinking of the use cases to actually develop on that.
Yep.
Okay, final question before we let you guys go. We've kept you guys longer than we said we would, so I apologize for that. But the questions are just coming in. So we've got a question from Charles. Are you guys more like site reliability engineers now with the whole DevOps stuff?
So I've seen that term come up a few times, and I'm not up to speed on my HR definitions. So it's like a new thing, an SRE and a site reliability engineer. I think we're closer to developers than traditional network engineers or network automation engineers, if you want to consider that term. But yeah, I would, if an SRE makes sense and is applicable, I think we're probably closer to that in our new DevOps approach as opposed to traditional network architects. Yeah.
Well, good stuff. Well, guys, I think I could talk at least another 3 or 4 hours about this stuff because it's so fascinating in the inflection point that we are in the industry and how really easy it is with tools that, by the way, a lot of them are free. And there was a question in there about Tower, and there's certainly advanced features that then you can bolt on paid products and stuff. But tools like Ansible, and somebody mentioned Terraform, there's so much free help to really make a difference in being able to scale, being able to automate state awareness in your network, that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense not to get started in some capacity.
Yeah, I completely agree. Our return on investment is massive because we haven't spent any money. We bought some Azure DevOps licenses, but everything else has been open source and free. So and in a public sector like us, it's hard for me to go get those licenses or go buy that new appliance.
Mhm.
I don't have that luxury to just go have an unlimited budget. So management's very impressed with the ROI, given there was no I to begin with.
Exactly.
It's like dividing by zero. It's like infinity.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yep. Well,
Well, hey,
guys,
guys.
thanks so much
Yeah.
for your time. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Really quick before we let you guys go, I did want to give you a quick update that apparently some police were called in and did this big bust in this lettuce farm recently, right? And there was a suspicion that they were combining plant and human DNA together to create this new protein hybrid. And so when they dug up the ground to kind of figure it all out, they found human romaines. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much. And it's been a pleasure and an inspiration. And hopefully we'll all maybe take a next step in our automation journey. So really appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so much
us.
for having
It's
us,
been
guys.
awesome. And
Lot of fun.
let's check in 6 months and we'll see what we're doing there.
Maybe
Yeah.
we can automate the DevCentral Connects show completely.
There you go. Like, we don't even have to show up for it. But
Yeah.
John, we're going to give four of your books away to some of the questions we're going to pick out. We're going to reach out to the people on YouTube. So, thanks for, investing in, your community by writing the book. Thanks for investing in the community by joining us here. And Dan, so thankful for your expertise, and you guys make a good team. This has been a good show.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Right on,
Thanks
guys.
again.
A lot.
Stay safe in
All right.
2020, everybody.
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, guys.
Definitely appreciate it, guys. All right.
Jason, what a pleasure, man. Those guys are amazing. And yeah, it's just cool to know, man. I know we said this, but everybody starts somewhere, and you take the first step. So
Yep. We had a
good
couple
stuff,
more
man.
questions that weren't directly related to the guys, so I'll jump in here on this one. Deployment limitations from Anise. The limitations with those, as far as Ansible is concerned, is what the limitations are with the automation side for GTM and APM and ASM. There are definitely ways that you can get at some of the configuration options, not through the iControl REST interface or through an AS3, but they're not necessarily for the faint of heart. But it is possible. But it's really, what's the limitation of the interface of those F5 modules, not the limitation with automating them from the Ansible side. And then another question from Anise was, can we find stuff that you're guys discussing here on DevCentral? Absolutely. We have a lot of Ansible content on DevCentral. There's also some Ansible labs out on Cloud Docs that you can go, and somebody mentioned playbooks earlier. And so I'll dig back through the comments and get those resources posted in the description as well for being able to go out and review F5 playbooks. And
yeah, I would mention too quickly on a previous episode of DevCentral Connects, we talked to Eric Chen about automation and the automation tool chain with F5. So on our YouTube channel, you can go, and we have a playlist of just the DevCentral Connects shows, so you can go back and look at some of that as well. So,
yep. Wow, this was better than Joe Rogan. Okay, that's got to be Dan's family, right?
The Joe Rogan experience. That's right. They just need to give us $100 million on Spotify, and we'll be all set.
That's right.
So good to go.
All right. Well, we're going to get out of here, but before we do, I want to promote a couple things coming up. November 10th, we've got the F5 Security Summit. Registration is required for that. we will drop that in the show description as well. But you're not going to want to miss that. There's 2 learning tracks. So that's going to be amazing stuff around, all things security. And on November 12th, back next week with me with an episode of You Want Answers. And then we're back here, John and I, 2 weeks from today, where we're going to talk about Shape. We're going to dig into what this AI thing is, and machine learning and deep learning, and what does a data scientist do? And so that's going to be a lot of fun. Emily Yale will join us for that.
Yeah.
We're going to do something a little different on December 1st. It's a Tuesday, and we're going to do a live Terraform lab with some amazing guys from Worldwide Technologies. So it's going to be a 2-hour event, and we're going to walk through live, as we kind of talk through the playbook of getting started with Ansible today. We're going to walk, soup to nuts, setting up Terraform for the first time and doing something fun and exciting with automating with Terraform. And so you'll want to join us for that. December 3rd, back here with John and I, DevCentral Connects. This is going to be an amazing show. We prepped for this one a while ago, but we're going to talk to a psychometrician. And if you don't know what that is, go look it up. But, we're going to look at the science behind how questions are written, how questions that were written were evaluated. And that's going to be, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that's all. It's going to be a great time. All those shows. One of those, really quick, a word on that Worldwide Technology Live Terraform thing. For those that want, you can certainly register and get in and kind of get your hands dirty typing away on the lab yourself. Or if you're like, hey, I don't really want to get in, I just kind of want to watch from the sidelines or watch from the stands, as it were, just join us here on the live stream, and we'll be going through it so you can just kind of observe, kind of from a distance if you want. Still ask questions and all that. So it'll be choose your adventure. Be in the lab or just sit there and watch. Grab your popcorn. Put me in the game, coach.
Right.
Or no, you know what? I'll sit in the stands on this one. I'll sit out the next couple of plays. So whatever floats your boat. Good stuff.
All right.
Well, Jason, it's been a great one, man.
It has. Yes, I'm excited and can't wait to be back here next week. And then you and I hopefully will be in the same studio together two weeks from today.
That's right. It's going to be amazing. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for connecting with us. All right. We'll see you guys.
Bye.